Chief! Chief, please wake up! Stella's trembling hands shook the lifeless body of Chief Okechukwu. He lay sprawled on the floor of the hotel room, his head bleeding from where it had hit the edge of the bed. Stella's heart raced as her mind spun in chaos. "God, what have I done?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. She crouched beside him, shaking him harder, hoping he would move, but his body was still. Her hands, now covered in his blood, trembled as she reached for her phone. She dialed Kelvin's number, her voice barely audible. "Kelvin, something terrible has happened. I didn't mean to. Chief is dead." Kelvin's voice was cold and impatient. "What are you talking about? Dead? How could you be so careless?" "Careless? He tried to force me. I was defending myself." "Listen, Stella," Kelvin snapped. "Get out of there. Now I'll handle it." Stella stared at the lifeless body one last time before grabbing her purse and bolting from the room. As she ran into the dark Lagos streets, her mind flashed back to how it had all started. 8 months earlier. It was a dark, stormy night in Lagos when Stella first met Kelvin. She was sitting in a corner of a dingy bar, the kind of place where shadows whispered secrets and desperation lingered in the air. She wasn't proud of her life as a prostitute, but it was all she knew. Kelvin walked in with an air of confidence that turned heads. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and handsome in a way that suggested he was used to being in control. Spotting Stella, he made his way toward her, flashing a smile that could melt even the hardest heart. "Why is the prettiest woman in this place sitting alone?" he asked. Stella looked up, her expression guarded. "If you're here to waste my time, you've got the wrong table," Kelvin chuckled, pulling out a chair. "Feisty. I like that. But I'm not here to waste your time." That night, Stella saw something in Kelvin that she hadn't seen in years. Kindness. They talked for hours, and by morning she found herself in his arms, feeling an unfamiliar sense of hope. Months later, Stella and Kelvin moved in together. Kelvin had promised her a new life, far from the streets. Stella got a job as a cleaner, while Kelvin claimed he was working on business opportunities. At first, it seemed perfect. They laughed, cooked together, and dreamed of a future. But the cracks began to show when Kelvin refused to get a job. "Why should I work when you're making money?" he asked one evening, sprawled on the couch. "Kelvin, I can't do this alone," Stella said, frustrated. "The rent is due and we barely have food in the house," Kelvin scoffed. "You're always nagging. If you want things to change, then do something about it." Kelvin's laziness soon turned into cruelty. One night, after coming home drunk, he sat Stella down. "I've been thinking," he began. His words slurred. "You used to make a lot of money before we met, right? Why not go back to that? Just for a while." Stella froze, her stomach churning. "Kelvin, what are you saying?" "I'm saying you can help us. Sleep with men. Make money. It's not like you haven't done it before." Stella's eyes filled with tears. "Kelvin, I left that life behind. Don't ask me to go back." Kelvin's expression darkened. "Don't act like you're too good for this. You were a prostitute, Stella. Don't forget where I found you." That night, Stella cried herself to sleep, praying for strength. Kelvin soon forced Stella into his scheme. He would dress her in revealing clothes and take her to high-end hotels, introducing her to wealthy men. Stella felt her spirit breaking, but every time she protested, Kelvin would lash out. "Do you want us to starve? Do you want me to be homeless?" he would shout. And when words weren't enough, he used his fists. Stella endured it all, hoping for a way out. That night with Chief Okechukwu was different. He was aggressive, his eyes wild with desire. Stella begged him to stop, but he wouldn't listen. "Relax, my dear," Chief said, grabbing her arm. "I paid your husband. You belong to me tonight." When he tried to force her onto the bed, Stella fought back. In the struggle, she pushed him, and he fell. His head hit the edge of the bed with a sickening thud. The next morning, Stella was arrested. At the police station, she broke down and told the DPO everything. How Kelvin had been forcing her into prostitution, how she had tried to defend herself. The DPO listened carefully, his face a mask of anger and pity. "Your husband will pay for this," he said firmly. Kelvin was arrested later that day. Months later, Stella sat in a hospital waiting for her test results. The doctor entered the room, his face somber. "I'm sorry, Stella," he said. "You're HIV positive." Stella felt her world shatter. She thought about the life she had lived, the man who had betrayed her and the choices she had made. But as she looked out the window, she made a decision. She would fight. She would rebuild her life. She would use her story to help other women find their voice. Silence destroys lives. Speak out against abuse. Together we can create a